but I'd let people know there might be some technical problems, that kind of jazz. And we should be live maybe now. We're live now.
Are we live now?
I think so.
Am I on?
I hope so.
Hey, I'm Walter, New York City tour guide with Sandemans. We are in Battery Park right now. We're going to do a little walk through Lower Manhattan today, focusing primarily on the area we call the financial district down here. We're in Battery Park right now. Battery Park, it gets its name because it was part of a big military battery at one time. Actually, you know, beyond us, right over here, there's water in the background. That is New York Harbor over there. During the 19th century, the second most prolific shipping port in the entire world behind the port of Singapore. It's the gateway from the Atlantic Ocean to New York City. And that building over there is how we get the name Battery Park. That is Castle Clinton over there. It was built up in 1811, just in time for the War of 1812, to protect New York City from invading British forces coming across the Atlantic. So that's some pretty old history in terms of New York City. It kind of goes back to, you know, the earliest days of the country for the most part. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to really, you know, traverse an area that if you're traversing it and you're really kind of looking deep, you can go back to the origin story of this country and this city. So in order to do that, are we still live there, Chris? Got Chris on the camera over here. Are we live over here? Are we on YouTube right now?
Yeah, I'm watching live on YouTube.
We're watching live on YouTube. We might not be on Facebook. So what I want to do now is I want to point your attention to this this monument over here. It's at the base of the flagpole right over here.
We're gonna figure it out.
Okay.
If you can go to, if you can just go to Facebook, you keep going.
Okay.
If you can go to Facebook and just let
So
by posting there, that will
so the base of the flagpole here, you'll notice on the base there, it says this is a gift from the Dutch from 1926. That's commemorating the 300th anniversary of the establishment of New Amsterdam. Now, when we talk about New York City, it's part of being part of the United States and whatnot. Way before that, okay, cool. Way before that happened, this was Native American hunting and trading ground for centuries. The dominant tribe in this area were known as the Lenape. Lenape tribe had a very interesting word for this island we call Manhattan these days. They called it Mannahatta. Mannahatta translates out to land of rolling hills, the land of many hills. However, starting in the 1600s, there was a lot of competition to establish trading posts in what they called the New World. And the Dutch came over here in 1626 and they established a town called New Amsterdam. Now, if you're looking at this flagpole here, to the right over there, the person in the Dutch clothing, the man named Peter Minuet, he was an administrator for what was known as the Dutch West India Company. At that time, the Dutch East India Company was like the Amazon of their day. They were like the most prolific trading company in the entire world. These guys were looking to expand to go basically across the Atlantic Ocean going west. They call themselves the Dutch West India Company. And you notice he's handing some beads over there to the Native American chief over there with the Lenape tribe. Those beads are known as wampum. Wampum was the currency here on Mannahatta, strung beads basically. They had various values, supposedly for about $26 worth of beads. He is purchasing Mannahatta from the Lenape and transferring it to the Dutch West India Company. Fun little fact about it though, the sale never took place. It's original fake news, one could say. If you ever want to really talk about the history of this nation, one of the things you do have to talk about is the displacement of the Native American people leading to all the stuff that sort of came later. And in order to do that, I want to take you guys across the street to a very interesting museum known as the Museum of the American Indian. It's run by the Smithsonian. And as you guys all know, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. And a lot of our museums and institutions are closed right now. This museum is one of them. Otherwise, though, it is open 364 days out of the year. The only day it's ever closed is on Christmas usually. So when you come to New York after the pandemic is over, this is going to be a museum you are definitely going to want to check out. Originally, before it was a museum dedicated to the history of the Native American peoples, It was known as the U.S. Customs House, and it was designed by Cass Gilbert, an amazing architect from the turn of the 20th century. It was known, at times during its life as the Alexander Hamilton Customs House, who was our very first Secretary of the Treasury. And a lot of people, because of that, think it's like a Revolutionary War era building, but no, it's from 1907. But if you ever want to get a really interesting, detailed history of the Native American peoples, this is a museum you want to check out. It's run, again, by the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian is our federal arts institution based out of Washington, D.C. That means all of our Smithsonian institutions are paid for with tax dollars. So guess what? That makes it a free museum for anyone who wants to partake. So the Lenape were here for centuries. The Dutch came in the 1600s. And at that time, there were two dominant naval powers in the world. You had the Dutch and you had the British. Let's talk a little bit about the British coming over this way. And we're going to walk towards what is known, it's the oldest established city-run park in all of New York City. It was established by the British back in 1733 as a city-run entity. This is known as Bowling Green Park. It's called Bowling Green Park because the Dutch used to lawn bowl on the green down here, and the British sort of consolidated it into a park. Now, how did the British get here? The Dutch were coming over to establish some trading routes across the Atlantic Ocean. What were the British doing? They were doing the same exact thing. While the Dutch were over here, to the north of us we have an area we call New England, and to the south of us we had colonies like Jamestown, Virginia. The British were also coming over here to sort of get their hand to this pot as well. And in 1664, there was a series of global conflicts in the 1600s. They're called the Anglo-Dutch Wars, basically. The British and the Dutch are going at it. And the Duke of York, that's his title, is actually the future King James II of England. He said, you know what, we should take that New Amsterdam from the Dutch. We don't like them very much. So the British bottled up the harbor right over there where Castle Clinton is, and they basically annexed New Amsterdam from the Dutch. And it's known as Yorkville, and then later turned into New York, again named after the Duke of York. So that's when British colonization starts here. And I point that out because what we're going to talk about now is a little bit of Revolutionary War history. So we got the Native Americans, we got the Dutch. We're going to go through Bowling Green Park right here. Again, it's the oldest established park in the city. So let's talk a little bit about the British sort of being here. So they expand the city. It actually becomes a much busier, more mercantile sort of a center. And over the course of time, the colonists are second and third generation. They're not from England, they're actually from here. And what's going on in the 1700s is there's another series of global conflicts, basically between the French and the British. One big one is known as the 7 Years' War. And over here in North America, it was known as the French-Indian War. And basically, the French and the British are going at it over here, over a lot of the colonies over here in North America. The British win the war, but when they did so, they said, hey, we put a lot of energy into preserving these colonies. We're going to get some kickback for that. So they passed what they called Stamp and Tax Acts on the colonies, New York being one of the original 13 colonies, by the way. All of a sudden, you were paying money, basically, and it was all going back to the Crown in England on things like molasses and tea. You want to get something, stamped or notarized. All this money was going back to the Crown in England. And a lot of the colonists had a very big problem with that. It basically, long short, leads to the American Revolution. And I mentioned that, there were small little, uprisings in the colonies and whatnot going on in the 1770s. It gets to such a fevered pitch that on July 4th, 1776, a formal Declaration of Independence is read. It's actually signed down in Philadelphia and then read in New York just 5 days later, July 9th, 1776. Right after that, the crowd got into such a fervor. They heard this declaration read aloud that they came down here to Bowling Green Park. And this is the oldest fence in the city, by the way. I'm not kidding you. It's the oldest park from 1733. The fence was put up in 1771. And on these posts here at that time, there were crowns in the replication of the crown that King George III wore at the time. And people cut the crowns off of so you see the jagged edges here on the post. These are actually the remnants of people sort of slicing off King George's crown after they heard this Declaration of Independence read to them in July of 1776. Fun fact about New York City during the Revolution. It was the British headquarters during the Revolution. It was the very last colony evacuated. You know, over the course of time, you know, throughout the 13 colonies, there's more and more insurrection against British rule. And one by one, the British have to give up their colonies. The very last one they gave up was New York. November 25th, 1783 is known as Evacuation Day. In fact, we're at Evacuation Day Plaza right here, and the flagpole right over here with the American flag. That's a replication of the original colonial 13, the original an entity with 13 stars on it, representing the 13 states. This is known as the Evacuation Day flagpole, and it's a fun little story behind it. As the British are evacuating, this is not the original pole, by the way, and I hate to give away, you know, this is definitely a replication, but they grease the pole. They keep the British Union Jack up there. They grease the pole so no one can take down the British flag. And a revolutionary named John Van Arsdale actually got some cleats from a hardware store, climbs to the top of the Evacuation Day pole, and yanks down the British flag, and they start flying the American flag. And the American flag has been flying up there in one form or another basically since November of 1783. So that's a little bit of a long short of how we even get to New York City. New York, one of the original 13 states. It's actually the first capital of the new nation after the British evacuate. And when you're in Lower Manhattan, one of the things that Lower Manhattan is most associated with is financial services and sort of, you know, let's face it, New York City is a moneyed city. And we're going to talk about some of the older history as we kind of walk through. But right now I want to talk about one of the modern symbols that sort of represents the financial district. We're kind of looking at it right over here. You see people gathering around it today. This is known as the charging bull. We're looking at the butt of the charging bull right now. You want to come over, we'll actually get a side view, get a better view of the bull. And I'll give you a little bit of history of the bull, basically, as we do it. Yeah. So this is the charging bull statue. This is a 3.5-ton statue, 7,000 pounds, made primarily of bronze, cast by a man named Alfred de Monaco. You know, we were just talking briefly. I gave you a sort of a brief rundown of just a little, like how we even get to be New York City. That's some older history. This is a much more modern symbol. This was cast in 1989 in Italy. Now, fun fact about this bull. New York City did not commission this bull. No one asked for the bull. Alfred de Monaco, I think it's about $250,000 of his own money, casts this 3.5-ton bull, crates it up, ships it over here, and drops it around the corner. We'll be there in a few minutes in front of the New York Stock Exchange, Christmas time, 1989. So here's a question. How on earth, how would you ever basically drop a 7,000-pound bull in the middle of New York City and not get caught? And the answer is you could not do it today. You absolutely could not. Back in those days, no one lived down here. It was it's a business district. It's only been in recent years that they actually started building hotels down here and expanding the sort of, the residential possibilities down here. This was kind of a ghost town on the weekends 30, 40 years ago or so. So if you're going to drop a bull anywhere, this is where you do it. And so de Monaco drops it with his crew in front of the stock exchange, and people went into work on Monday. They're like, hey, there's a 7,000-pound bull here, ha ha. And you know what? Everyone that works down here works in the financial industry, and they got the joke. Why is it a bull? A bull market? That's a vibrant market. A bear market is a down market. A bull one is up, because the bull charges with his horns and the bear pounces, supposedly. That's kind of how that gets there. But the bull's not supposed to be there. So what does the city do? They impound it. They literally lift it out with a crane. But in the 1 or 2 days that it was out there, it made a very big impression on the general public. People were kind of like, bring back the bull, bring back the bull. So he said, fine, we'll bring back the bull. We're not keeping it in front of the stock exchange, though. It's too narrow. We got to find another space for it. And guess what? The Evacuation Day Plaza right around the block, nice open space. This is where the bull has been now since 1989. And again, it's sort of the modern, I guess the most modern symbol representing the financial district, basically. And speaking of that, Chris, I think we should basically walk over towards the stock exchange and sort of talk about that.
Let's head up.
We're heading up Broadway. By the way, when you're on Broadway, so there's a few things you think about when you're on Broadway, right? You hear Broadway, and what do? You think of, like, you know, Cats, Les Mis, Hamilton, guys, like Broadway theater. But Broadway is actually an avenue. It's the longest one in the entire borough of Manhattan. It's the only one that runs the entire length of Manhattan, 13.2 miles. And when you walk on it, you know what you're walking on. The remnants of an old Native American hunting and trading trail carved out by the Lenape centuries ago. Broadway, what we call Broadway, is the way the Lenape traversed Manhattan way back when to do their business up and down the island. So when you're walking on Broadway, that's what you're walking on, an old Native American hunting and trading trail. Also, down here in Lower Manhattan, if you notice down here on the ground, like Wiley Post, he flew around the world in 7 days back in 1933. And so there are a whole bunch of these markers down here on Lower Broadway. When you're down here, this is known as the Canyon of Heroes down here. Anytime you've seen a ticker tape parade, you know, where they throw the confetti, the ticker tape out the window, like when the Yankees win the World Series or something like that, it happens right down here. They shut Lower Broadway down, and they have like motorcades going up and down Lower Broadway. So it's called the Canyon of Heroes. And these markers in the ground kind of indicate, you know, parades that have happened. This is like after World War II, you know, Dwight Eisenhower coming in here and basically celebrating the end of the world, things like that. And they're on either side of Broadway. So, you know, for those of you tuning in right now, and glad to have you on this unseasonably warm Sunday here in New York City. It's supposed to snow tomorrow, though, to give you an idea about, you know, I know a lot of you guys are in Europe right now, so it's like, oh, I don't know. Let me do my little thing. Let me do it on my phone right now. I'll give you the exact temperature. So it's 61 degrees Fahrenheit, but I know you guys do Celsius over there, so it's like 16 right now. Tomorrow it's going to be 7, and by Friday it's going to be 0, and it's going to snow throughout the week. So we have and despite the pandemic, you see, it's a city that never sleeps. It also never stops building. There's always something going on down here. So despite all that, the city still goes on. You may have heard, oh, you know, New York City's had a real downturn, all this stuff. Nope, it's still business as usual. Stuff still goes on. And it's also another fun little thing we get to do here on the weekends, especially. It's still primarily a business district down here. So there's not a lot of people down here on the weekends, even without the pandemic. It's usually a pretty, you know, it's like spaced out down here during the weekends and whatnot. So you get to walk down these side streets and not have a lot of people around you, basically. It's kind of cool to do.
We're done.
We're gonna do some law breaking right now, I think.
Easier for you to law break without the camera.
You got it? Whoop. That's fine. Oh, I know everybody. Listen, every time I've done this tour, I get people, they want to know what's up with the steam. What's going on with the steam? So this is perfect. Again, this is a great thing to do on the weekend. We can stand in the middle of the street and do this. So this is exhaust, basically. So if you notice the little on the cap here, it says Con Edison. That stands for Consolidated Edison. And if you think that name sounds familiar, it's Thomas Edison. That's right, electric. Con Edison is the electric supplier for New York City. One of the ways they generate electricity is with steam turbines. This is just exhaust. They tell us it's safe. I've been breathing it in my whole life. I think I should. It explains a lot, though, if it's not.
You see it better when it's colder.
You do see it when better it's cold. It does exude, but that is the story behind that. It's just steam coming up.
Hey, Walter, ask people where they're watching from right now.
Hey guys, where are you watching from? What we got here? What we got? Because it's only on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not getting anything on
We
it.
couldn't figure out how to make it work on
Facebook.
right now with this new streaming thing.
That's
so hopefully
cool.
people will figure it out. The
Hopefully.
advertising all said go to YouTube.
That's
but
well, that should work then.
We got Lisa in Southwest Ohio.
Ohio?
Check it out. You can see people are telling you where they're from.
Let's see. Lisa's from where?
Ohio, Southwestern
Oh,
Ohio.
yeah, we got a lot of people from. We got Texas,
Christina
Ohio.
saying hi from Denmark.
Got Denmark, Cincinnati, just north of Cincinnati. We got some
Hey,
Ohio
very
reps today.
cool.
Ohio
cool.
repping. Ohio.
Nikki from
repping.
Scotland, Edinburgh.
Oh, hey, Scott. We got them all. Hey, by the way, guys, when you're down here, if you've ever been to New York or you haven't been, you've probably seen, if you've seen film, you've seen like different color codes on your street signs and things. Down here, where it says Broad Street right here, with the black sign with white lettering. Anytime you see that black sign with white lettering, you're looking at a street that was gridded out before the revolution actually started. So these are actually pre-Revolutionary War sort of laid out streets. So if you see that black and white street sign anytime you're in, that's kind of what it means. And hey, it's the holiday season. And everyone knows about the tree in Rockefeller Center, but we do an amazing tree down here in the financial district every year too. In fact, in 1989, when DeMartica sort of dropped the bowl, this is exactly where it was, right by the tree. It was like a gift, basically.
Christina shouts out. She did a tour with you April last year.
Oh, hi, Christina. Where's she from again?
Christina was our friend from Denmark.
Hey, Christina. Thanks for tuning in again. So this is the holiday tree. So also, they have the Kwanzaa candles, which will be lit up for Kwanzaa when that happens a little bit later in the month. And on the other side here, you have a Hanukkah menorah. And it is the fourth day of Hanukkah, it will be the fourth night of Hanukkah. Right? So we have Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, and of course a great Christmas tree here represented. I know, it looks amazing. It's pretty great. But what I really want to talk about over here, when we're in the financial district, the building that reps it, obviously the most worldwide anyway, it's the New York Stock Exchange. So let's talk a little bit about the stock exchange, what it is, how it came about, what's going on. So we've been doing a form of exchanging down here really since our inception as a nation after the Revolutionary War. There were a bunch of traders and bankers. They got together under these buttonwood trees and they would exchange commodities. And in 1792, they actually signed a pact known as the Buttonwood Agreement, basically creating a proper exchange. And in fact, the New York Stock Exchange here has gone through a few physical iterations over the years. This building went up in 1903 and a beautiful neoclassical design. It is the most prolific financial institution in the entire world. There are over 2,400 companies represented on the stock exchange board, basically, that are listed by the New York Stock Exchange. And something like $23 trillion was transacted through those companies last year. Now, if you've ever seen a movie like Wall Street or The Wolf of Wall Street, you see like the hectic trading on the floor. Not really like that so much anymore, not just because of the pandemic. Things are done with fiber optics nowadays, so a lot of times people are on their computers. I mean, there's still a lot of business that gets done in there, but it is not nearly as hustling and bustling a scene as it used to be. But it really is the symbol of the financial district. Another interesting thing we're going to look at right over here, and you see this young lady over here. She's sort of posing with the statue over here. We'll get a glimpse at it as well. This is known as the Fearless Girl statue right over here. And she's masking up. She's smart. So a couple of years ago, it's been about 2 years now, she's been staring right at the New York Stock Exchange over here. Before that, she was actually staring down the charging bull, which we were looking at right before, as sort of a symbol of female empowerment. She's a 200-pound statue staring down that 7,000-pound bull. Now, 2 years ago, they moved her over here, and now, she's sort of staring down the stock exchange. I always say, she's going to join a hedge fund one day or something. That's kind of what's going on right over here. Supposedly, they're going to move her at some point to the Museum of the City of New York, which is up on Fifth Avenue, around 103rd Street. But so far, she's still down here. So I don't know when they're going to move her. That will happen at some point, though. That will definitely happen at some point. So guys, let's walk over here and talk about another symbol of the financial district. Oh, is that it?
Yeah, we got
Oh,
time to kill, bro.
we're gonna. Well, we'll be. So, hey,
Lisa
Lisa.
reaches out and says, "Here, go take a look."
Hey.
She says she's surprised that the boat hasn't been there that long, and Clara from London says, "Great to see you. She did some tours with you in Brooklyn
Oh.
Bridge with you in 2019."
Well, thank you for tuning in again. You did the Brooklyn tour is so much fun. So when Sandeman's reopened, that was actually one of our, everyone's favorite tour to do, the Brooklyn tour. We also did on that tour, by the way, it's not far from here too. You get the Brooklyn Bridge, you get Chinatown, Little Italy. It's a really cool thing. Again, get a lot of interesting culture sort of, going with that. Now, where we are right now, you talk about symbols of the financial district. This is really the symbol. So you got the stock exchange right here. But technically, the facade we were looking at is on Broad Street. But the street that is most synonymous with the financial district is Wall Street, which goes east and west this way. How does Wall Street get its name, you ask? I'll tell you. There was a big wall here at one time, no joke. At the end of the Dutch era in the 1650s, they put up a big wall to protect the commerce down by the water from potential invasions coming from the north. And these posts in the ground represent where the wall stood. This is not the original wood. It was mostly a stone wall, but supposedly this is kind of where it stood east and west across here on Wall Street. So that's how it gets its name. In fact, when you're in Manhattan, a lot of times the streets have names that are based on physical symbols. So Wall Street is a pretty good an example of that. So hey, guess what? It's a statue of George Washington standing right in front of us. Now, we were talking a little bit about early New York City and early American history before. And George Washington certainly is a person that sort of, comes to mind when you're thinking about those things. So let's talk a little bit about why this statue of Washington is here. In fact, if you look at the inscription right there, it'll tell you that on April 30th, 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the very first president of the United States, essentially right where that statue is standing. So let's just talk a little bit about that. Washington, famously, was the commanding general of the Continental Army. So he led the revolutionary forces against the British. So he's a pretty popular figure in the new nation, basically. And after the revolution was over, I don't want to bore you guys too much with mundane sort of history, but basically those 13 original colonies,
Walter, you couldn't bore us.
they turned into 13 states under a banner known as the Articles of Confederation. It turned those 13 colonies into 13 states. It gave individual states a lot of power, though, and it was too much of a good thing, so a series of papers were drawn up. They're called the Federalist Papers, and they turned into, later on, they basically were a call for what turned into the U.S. Constitution, which was drawn up in 1787, ratified in 1788, and that's the document we use this day to basically give us our separation of powers, the three branches of government. You got your judicial branch, headed by the Supreme Court, your legislative branch, which is our Congress, Senate, and the House of Reps, and of course the executive branch, headed by the President. So it actually gave us a sort of a hierarchy. And who better to be the very first president of the United States, people figure, than George Washington? In fact, the very first presidential election was not exactly a popular vote. There were sort of delegates, reps from all these original states, and Washington was elected unanimously, which usually only happens in a Borat kind of country, but that's what happened here in our very first election. So The very first presidential inauguration happened here. Why? Because New York City was the nation's capital in the very early days of the nation. We do our inaugurations every 4 years down in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. In fact, in about a month, Joe Biden will be the 46th president of the United States. He'll be inaugurated. He's got it wrapped up. He's got it wrapped up. At this point, my goodness, my God, it's been elongated. But he's got it wrapped up. It'll be January 20th. So how did it get to D.C.? Why is it in D.C.? Why not New York? New York, in my opinion, and by the way, I don't know, I did not mention this. I'm a native New Yorker. So when you do a tour with me, you're doing one with a native New Yorker. So as a snooty native New Yorker, I'm like, New York City could be the nation's capital. Why not? So why isn't it anymore? And it was only for a short amount of time. And the reason is, remember I was talking about the Buttonwood Arrangement, all the money that was flowing down here? Those founding fathers said, you know what? Probably a good idea to get the political capital away from the financial stuff. And that sounds like a good idea on paper. So they said, you know what? We got to get the nation's capital out of New York. They said, fine. So they did that. So that's how Washington, D.C. gets created, basically. The idea was to create sort of its own political center away from the moneyed interest. So it was here in New York, only one inauguration. Then it was down in Philadelphia during the 1790s, and now it's been down in D.C. since the very turn of the 19th century.
You got a good view of Trinity if you want to talk it up real quick just from here, and we'll walk this way instead.
You want me to talk about Trinity from
here?
Because
we can see it really well.
Hi, Trinity Church. So that is Trinity Church right over there. That is the oldest established church in Manhattan. 1696, established by the Church of England back in 1696. It's in its third physical iteration. So in 1776, there was a fire, known as the Fire of 1776. You know, a lot of structures back in those days were made out of wood and stone, and guess what? Those things catch fire. So there were a lot of big fires in major cities, really throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, before they basically fireproofed and started using different materials to build buildings. So it burned down about a half of colonial New York, basically, or Manhattan at that time, the Great Fire of 1776. Trinity was one of those casualties. They built it up again, and in 1838 there was a big snowstorm that caved it in during the winter, and that's the third iteration from 1846 right across the way over there. Now, by the way, a fun little fact about the where we're looking at Washington statue once again. This is known as Federal Hall. Now, at the time when Washington was inaugurated, this was our city hall, where the mayor had his offices and whatnot. That's why, and basically the federal government kind of ran itself out of here. But it was too small to do all those things. And again, the presidency moves down to D.C. City Hall for the mayor moved a little bit further uptown, about 10 blocks up from here. And in 1842, they refurbished that as a national monument in honor of Washington being inaugurated here. So we spoke a little bit about presidential power and money and corruption in politics and all that kind of stuff. So let's walk down the block and talk a little bit about that further over here. And you know, fun little thing to talk about as we're walking down, Wall Street over here. A lot of these buildings over here are from, like 1903 is the stock exchange, but everything else is from the 19th century. The newest building on the block is actually over here, and it's actually 90 years old, but it's actually one of the newer buildings sort of in the financial district, technically speaking, at least on Wall Street anyway. And that is the building known as 40 Wall Street. 40 Wall Street opened in 1930. And when it did so, if you look up, it was the tallest building in the world for a very, very short amount of time. Designed by an amazing architect, Craig Severance, 70 stories, just under 1,000 feet in the air. And because of that, it was by far the tallest building in the financial district, and remained so until the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers opened in 1973. So 40 Wall Street, prominent building over the years because of its height and its prominence in the area. A lot of, I guess you say, big banks and financial institutions have had their offices in 40 Wall. One of those people that decided, hey, I should have a space in 40 Wall, Donald Trump, that's right, the outgoing president of the United States. He had office in 40 Wall, or his organization did, back in 1996, almost 25 years ago. And hey,
big L.
Big L. Big L.
Big loser.
He did lose. He did lose. He lost big. 6 million votes, a lot of votes. But a lot of times when I do this tour, fun thing, people come down here, they see Trump's name, then they look up at the building, and they're like, this must be Trump Tower. It's such a tall building. It's got Trump's name on it. We'll go back that way. We'll go back that way in a minute. It's got Trump's name on it. It's such a tall building. This has to be Trump Tower, but it's not Trump Tower. Trump has never lived. It's not a residential building. It's strictly an office. You want to go to Trump Tower in New York for whatever reason, if you want to do such a thing, it's on 5th Avenue, way uptown, right below Central Park at 56th Street. If you want to do that, but that is how Trump basically opens the building, and he's like, hey. Rather, he opens an office in the building and says, hey, I want to get my sort of stamp on things down here. So he paid some extra money for some branding, so that's how he got his name stamped on the building back in the. But he has nothing to do with it. He did not build the building or anything like that. It's from 1930, way before he was even born. So I want to talk about something else while we're down here on Wall Street. We have a little bit of time. Chris, do we have enough time to talk for a little bit while longer?
Generally, what people ask for, absolutely. They're gonna keep hanging out with us for as long as we keep going, I imagine. Because we got some awesome people. Cool. Lisa just commented recently about how amazing it is. All the buildings are built without all the modern day equipment that we have today, but they were still able to reach the skies with the skyscrapers. But give people an option. They could choose and ask people what they want to see. And then head to the.
What do you think they'd like to see?
Well, I think that we could go up to St. Paul's.
We could do that.
I mean, it just depends on how you're feeling, brother.
I'm fine. I mean, we could go to St. Paul, sure.
Guys, should we head up to St. Paul's and maybe make it over to the.
You want to do
9/11?
You want to do the Trade Center?
We could just see how we're doing until the battery dies for a little while.
Okay.
If you feel it.
Well, let's do.
Show them that.
I do. Yeah, let's do that then. Let's do that.
Cool.
So this is interesting. Very interesting.
Cool.
This is interesting. So the pock marks on the wall over here, and you sort of see them like right.
Lisa gives us 2 thumbs up. Says yes. Keep on going.
Okay, Lisa, we'll do it.
For Cincinnati.
So as we see these pock marks on the wall here, these are a remnant of the most extreme terrorist attack in the history of New York City before September 11, 2001. This is the Wall Street terror attack, September 16th, 1920. Basically anti-capitalist anarchists on that day at noon, lunchtime, loaded a horse and wagon with about 1,500 pounds of dynamite, came literally right down the block here and exploded, killed 39 people and injured hundreds more. And growing up in New York, it wasn't something you heard about a lot because there wasn't filmed footage of it and whatnot. But after the events of 9/11, it was something that was kind of brought back into, I guess, the public consciousness a little bit. So when we actually do go over towards the World Trade Center in a few minutes, it's something to keep in mind as we kind of go over there. Sure. So let's scooch up this way.
Should we? Let's do it.
Why not?
Well, what part of New York do you live in again?
Right at the moment, I live in Sunnyside. Oh. And for anyone who's been to New York, it's right across the East River. So Manhattan is surrounded. So Manhattan's an island, surrounded by water. On the west side, the Hudson River. Hudson River separates Manhattan from New Jersey across the way. The East River.
Thank goodness something separates us from New Jersey.
Hey, but I'm here all week, folks. I'm here all. Let's cut up Nassau. And then on the east side, anyone who's walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, you're going across the East River. And the East River is it separates Manhattan from Brooklyn and Queens. So Sunnyside is in Queens. It's right above Brooklyn, though. So it's basically the south end of Queens. Right where I am is right across the water. So I can see at the Empire State Building when I walk down the block. It's literally right across. So that's how close I am to Manhattan. But I am in Sunnyside. I grew up in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and Ridgewood, Queens, which is Again, not terribly far from Manhattan. So I was always like in Manhattan a lot as a kid. And I
always thought that Brooklyn was the most populous.
It is.
But I heard someone from Queens recently doing a live stream saying that no, Queens is the most populous borough.
Brooklyn has about 2.6 million people last I checked. Queens is about 2.3.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But they're the two most populated.
Right. Well, it was someone from Queens that was saying it. So.
Oh, they have some Queens pride. That's okay. That's cool. Manhattan has about 1.8 to 1.9. The most densely populated is Manhattan because it's so small. Staten Island has about 500,000 people, and the Bronx has about 1.5 or so.
We got a request if we can see the Calatrava World Trade.
We'll be over there. We'll be over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We'll see the Oculus. Oh yeah.
I heard that Calatrava got sued.
Did he
actually.
really?
Yeah, because some of the other works that he did in Europe.
They look exactly the same.
No, that they started to fall down, like he had problems.
I have not heard that.
Yeah.
I have to. This is an interesting place to stand here, Chris. If you can, do you see the building? Can you get that on camera, Chris? The tall building over there?
Yeah.
That's 30 Pine Street, which was built in conjunction with 40 Wall. It never got quite as tall as 40 Wall. That is a brilliant version of an Art Deco skyscraper. Art Deco is short for Art Decorative. It was the dominant form between the two world wars of skyscraper building in New York City. In fact, when you're over here, you get 3 different looks at architecture from a relatively short amount of time. Right behind us, there's a car coming up, so watch that. But this building over here, this is 120 Broadway. This is known as the Equitable Building over here. And the Equitable Building is a very interesting one. It went up in 1915. It led to our building code, the 1916 building code, basically, which basically stopped building buildings like this. So why did they stop building buildings like this? Check it out. It takes up an entire city block. It goes from one corner to the other and down the block and then around again. And what does it do? It goes straight up in the air with no egress. So you may have noticed before when we were walking down that side street how like shadowy it was. There was no light and air. That was the way all lower Manhattan looked at that time. A lot of older buildings kind of got passed over. And basically in 1916 what they said was, look, you guys can build as high as you want, but when you do so, you have to build with egress to let light and air in. So 30 Pine across the way is a really good example of that.
I'm going to spin to 30 Pine, but also if we go in front of, what is it, the BB8, the Brown Brothers Harriman building? Which way are you going to go? You want to go this way or you want to go?
I was going to go this way. I was going to go, yeah. I was going to, and this is Manhattan Chase right here. This is a great example of international style architecture post-World War II. So we had the egress. You saw that on 30 Pine, right? The way the building went like this, right? It basically gets more narrow and more. It's called a wedding cake pan, basically. So it gets narrow and narrow and narrow as it goes across. This building's from 1965.
This guy here on the right.
Yeah, right. This is Manhattan Chase.
Right.
Tallest guy goes straight up in the air. When did they start doing that again? Basically in the 50s, a lot of building owners were complaining. And you know what they were saying? They're like, we're building higher and higher, and it's great, but guess what? The most sought after square footage is at the top, and it's the smallest part of the building. We're getting killed. What can we do? And the city said, fine, you want to build wider at top? Great. You have to have pedestrian walkways and plazas at the bottom. So this is like I guess one could say that Manhattan Chase, these buildings like this, are sort of the, I guess they are the dominant form of architecture really in the city over the last 50 to 60 years or so. So you got 3 of them right there. You had Equitable, 30 Pine, and Manhattan Chase, all built within about 40 years of each other, but they look drastically different, but actually built kind of relatively within the same time frame.
Yeah.
So pretty cool. Pretty cool, I think.
I agree.
I think it's, everyone says, when you're in New York City, you always look up. You want to get the story, look up, not down. So you get to see tops of buildings and all kinds of things like that. Get a lot of history kind of looking up sometimes. Yeah. But again, they give you an idea about the lights and the narrowness. Look at these side streets and these old sort of alleyways and stuff.
things are right behind us, it's hard for me to spin
okay.
fast enough to get to them.
Okay.
I don't want to make the folks who are watching get sick.
Oh. Only on Halloween.
Oh, I've been accused of vomitous camera handling in the past, so I try to slow pan it these days.
You know. A little Steven Soderbergh action. So
this is a good example of what you were just talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
The open plazas and whatnot.
Right, exactly.
Public artwork on the display and all that kind of thing. And again, you push off the sidewalk. Then again, you can build as high as you want and wide out, but you do have to let the light and air in on the ground. That was just different solutions.
And is it true that this entire park, Zuccotti Park, is actually the offset for this building?
It is the offset for this building. Yes, it is. And fun fact about Zuccotti Park, I guess it'll be, 9-10 years ago, it was 2011. That's where the Occupy Wall Street movement basically camped out for that fall, basically right across the way, all those lights. That is. So if you saw the Occupy movement, you heard about it, saw the footage on TV if you weren't here, this is exactly where it happened, right across the way where all those people are. And the reason they were able to do it was because it was a public plaza, not a park, so it didn't actually have an official closing time. So basically, you could camp out there, and it was kind of hard to basically boot people out. But eventually, they did boot them out. But that was, that's kind of how that worked, basically. This guy's named Double Check. He's been down here since the 70s. You see his old anachronistic sort of like calculator and whatnot. He's doing a double check of his bag, old double check, tape recorder in there. He's working for like the FBI or something.
Those cigarettes?
It's the 70s, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Don Draper kind of thing, going on. He's looking through the old double. He's moved a couple of times. He used to be down the block. They moved Double Check back up here. But when you're down here in Lower Manhattan, a lot of public art, lots of interesting, and sometimes they're hidden like Double Check. You might think that's a guy, but but then you have sort of more predominant kind of stuff. Cool. So what we're doing now, guys, is we're going to stroll down towards the Trade Center.
Sorry, Kristen, I missed that shot at Trinity.
You missed another shot?
Well, the commenters were saying there was a good shot at Trinity Church that I neglected to camera.
I think you're a pretty good DP, Chris.
You're too kind. You're too kind. I'm definitely the best value for money you ever get.
I think this is pretty good. If I was doing this, we'd be looking at the ground, right? I'd be all over the place. This is definitely good having you here.
Careful, you're going to end up having to do it yourself one of these days.
One of these days, it'll be fun. It'll be an adventure. So we're going to head to the Trade Center. We're going to do a couple of things that were requested by the folks on the live stream. We're going to talk a little bit about the Calatrava, and we'll wrap. You know what we're going to do? We're going to wrap in front of St. Paul's. How about that? We'll wrap around. How about that?
We'll go around.
We'll loop around.
Oh, I think that's awesome.
Loop up.
You guys are really getting it.
Yes, so World Trade Center. Let's talk a little bit about it as we're walking over there. What was it? How did it come to be? If you think about the name of the grounds, World Trade Center. It's right next to Wall Street, right? The idea was after World War II, basically increasing our imprint in the world banking market. This was meant to be an international city of commerce. That was sort of the idea behind it. And they break ground in 1965. Before that, this area down here was known as Radio Row. Pretty interesting, like electronic stores. Tons of them down here, right off the Hudson River as well, right beyond us. Can't really see it from here, but if you see these buildings over there, the river is right on the other side. It was a busy shipping port. There's a lot of sort of industrial buildings.
We're walking west right now.
We are walking west right now. You can't get much further west. You're in the water in about 2 more blocks. Yep. This is going.
Shout out.
Going what? Oh, to the yep. Ladder number 10, right across the way.
True that they suffered the highest proportion of losses. That's what that whole district.
I don't know who suffered the highest proportion. I know they definitely.
These guys were one of the first
guys
on the scene.
Oh yes, they were right. They're literally right across the street from the ground.
That's where it was, right?
Yeah. And Let's just walk. Let's walk into the ground. Yeah, let's walk into the ground. So, just a little bit again. So, the Twin Towers, which were the central point of the original World Trade Center, opened in 1973. And when they opened, they were the 2 tallest buildings in the entire world. And there were 7 buildings on the original Trade Center grounds, not just the Twin Towers. There were 7 in its entirety, and employed over 20,000 people per day on the grounds. Very hustling and bustling kind of scene. Excuse me. That's
for COVID, they put in directional barricades.
That's a very smart thing to do. So, like I said, 20,000 people employed down there. Very busy. It was strictly an office complex, though. Not a big attraction. Since then, you know, it's become a little bit sort of a place to commiserate and whatnot. But up to the point of September 11th, 2001, it was primarily a business area, and you had windows on the world. You had an observation deck. You had some smaller things, but it was not nearly as...
Windows on the world was a restaurant, right?
Yes. So, just briefly about the events of September 11, 2001. 4 planes were hijacked that morning. 2 of them were flown into the north and south towers on the morning of 9/11. And on the grounds here, 2,755 people lost their lives that day. Also, there was Flight 93, which downed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and of course, there was also the plane which basically struck the Pentagon. So all told, it's 2,977 people that lost their lives. Of course, the great majority of them were right here on the Trade Center grounds. What we're looking at right here is the footprint of where the South Tower stood. Again, there were 2 towers, 1 and 2 World Trade Center. 1 World Trade was known as the North Tower, 2 World Trade was known as the South Tower. This is the footprint of the South Tower's footprint. And the footprints are designed by a man named Michael Arad. Michael Arad's idea with the footprints is to have water streams going down towards the depths of where the original foundations were. The water streams represent the tears for the victims of the day, and along the ridges are the names of the victims of the day. They are not alphabetized, but rather grouped by the company you work for and friends and co-workers and you may have had at your job. So they are grouped together as best they can, so the names kind of lie together. So this is the South Tower's footprint. Over this way, this building that lies at an angle here, this is the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, which is an amazing cultural institution. The museum goes down beneath the ground, several stories deep, and you get just an amazing detailed history of the grounds and the day. It's highly recommended for anyone coming into the city. I've done it myself a couple of times. It's very, just again, a very brilliantly sort of curated institution.
Look what we just wandered up on.
Oh, don't worry about that. I'll get to that.
Yeah,
oh,
sorry.
I got that.
Don't look at that yet.
Yeah.
Don't look at that.
I'm going to come on
the other way.
Yeah, no. So on the other side of the museum, like I said, we're walking north now.
Look. The gosh darn reflection is making us look at it anyway.
Oh, it's fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. On the other side, though, of the museum, that's the North Tower's footprint. So sometimes people will hear about the combustion.
You want to pop in and look in?
Can we? Can we?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes people will talk about the combustion of the jet fuel that morning, and they'll see
empty.
What?
It was empty.
What was empty?
The hand sanitizer.
Oh, I have hand sanitizer on. But sometimes people will see the combustion of the fuel, they'll hear about it, and they're like, well, how could the buildings have, how would they have affected each other so much? The reason that the towers actually fell with not the direct impact of the planes, but the jet fuel which burned through and softened the steel, and then the weight from the building collapsed in on the softening steel. But if you look over here, you got the North Tower's footprint. This is where the North Tower stood. This is One World Trade Center. Over here, okay. Oh yeah, no. North Tower's footprint, South Tower's footprint. They're about 120 feet apart, basically. So sometimes people will see a photo of the Twin Towers and be like, well, is that an optical illusion? Could the buildings have been that close? When you come here, you really see how close these buildings actually were. And again, the sort of the center point here is the museum. Now, after the events of 9/11, there was some question as to what would be here. They knew there would be memorials, a museum. They also decided to get back to original purpose and basically become, again, sort of a big, office complex. The centerpiece of the Trade Center is One World Trade Center, which we're looking at right here. It's the building known as the Freedom Tower. Most people just call it One World Trade. That is the proper address for the building. It's the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. Bottom to the very tippy top of that spire up there, it's 1,776 feet in the air. And it's designed by a man named David Childs. It went through a whole bunch of, there were a whole bunch of proposed design, a very controversial project. That's why it took so long to actually build up. They actually didn't open until 2013. They could have probably opened a few years before, but they wanted to make sure they got it right, because there was a need to check in, I always say with the families and friends of the victims, they had to make sure they were proceeding in the proper manner. The original Trade Center had 7 buildings on the ground. The current one, when it's all said and done, will have 5 buildings on the ground. So,
I think they're going to make us exit back that way, unfortunately.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay.
Should we walk out that way?
Yeah, let's do it. So that's where that construction is right there, is where 2 World Trade Center will be. It's going to be a performing arts complex.
Oh, that's cool.
That's going to be the last building up.
Is that why they do it last? Because it's arts?
Probably.
First,
there was a lot of sort of, like, I guess you could say, controversy, or just making sure they got the buildings done. So you got 1 World Trade, 2. Behind it is 7 World Trade. That building right there is 7. Right behind it.
See, you keep flipping me back and forth.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Just focus wherever you want. You can catch up to me.
Exactly.
And across the way over here are 3 and 4 World Trade Center. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. 5 and 6 do not exist on the current plot. The space from the other 2 buildings, one could say it's a little, obviously a little bit of a different kind of design, but also you had to account for the fact you had the memorials and the museum.
Just give a shout out to her.
Hi, Lisa.
Lisa's been commenting a lot,
Oh,
so thank
great.
you, Lisa. Lisa's great.
Yeah. You shout her out too.
Well, I don't have a mic.
Oh, you don't have a mic?
No.
I thought you had a mic.
No, not Mike.
Oh.
You're Mike.
Oh, they can hear you though.
A little. If I'm loud enough.
Yeah, you're loud. So interesting.
I see it.
So,
I see it. I see my sanitizer. I'm
oh,
going
you got
in.
some sanitizer?
I'm going in.
Oh, okay. All right.
Success.
So up there You notice that globe-like structure. That's known as the sphere, designed by a man named Fritz Koenig. Fritz Koenig, an artist, and that globe structure is actually the one original work of art that survived the events of 9/11. So it actually sat basically between the Twin Towers, basically. And you can see the damage that the sphere, it's like it's supposed to represent a globe, so you can see the jagged sort of top and whatnot.
See this right here? Morton.
Hi, Morton. Oh, thank you, Morton. I appreciate it, sir. Thank you. Very nice of you to say. Thank you. So that's the sphere. So you can see the damage it received at the top. And other than that, though, it does not look that dissimilar. You know, it's sort of like, you know, sort of an avant-garde sort of like piece.
Kristen asks, was that in Battery Park before?
It was.
Yeah.
So it was excavated after the events of 9/11, and while they were rebuilding the grounds, it was right in Battery Park up until, I want to say, like 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago at this point, and they brought it back to the Trade Center, so it's back on the ground. That's the one work of original art that did survive the events of 9/11. So what we want to do now, I guess, is because of COVID, it's a little bit of a different sort of in and out kind of thing. We're gonna go out and around. We're gonna go over towards Calatrava, talk about that, and then we'll go by St. Paul's.
Yeah?
St. Paul's.
That works for everyone watching.
I hope so.
We'll do Calatrava and then St. Paul's. We'll call it a day.
Oh,
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Oh, that's in St. Nicholas Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church. It was in fact damaged on 9/11, but the reason they're still doing construction is purely financial. They actually ran out of money for their reconstruction a long time ago. They're finally getting back to it now. I haven't seen it in quite some time, and they seem to have sort of worked on it a little bit since the last time I was down here.
Was it aqua marine blue?
It was not aqua. That was the thing. So that's like a new, and it's going to look like that on the side. So I think that's just like some insulation or something. I don't know what's going on. But
I see.
They've come along a little bit. They've come along a little bit since the last time I was down here, which was, by the way, March. I have not actually been down here in about 9 months.
I'm glad this live stream can be part of the excuse for you to come back down.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm thrilled to be here, and it's actually a great deal of fun. And also, as we're going to walk over this way, you can see what a beautiful job. Even down here in like a business district, you saw the Trade Center tree, rather the Wall Street tree, and you see these beautiful trees they have in the lobby here of the Trade Center. We do Christmas quite nicely here in New York City, and it's a little different this year, obviously, a little bit more subdued, but it's.
And also being like 60 degrees today.
It's a funny,
I'm telling you. It doesn't feel like winter.
This is the kind of weather that your mother would say, this is when people get sick. You don't know how to dress. Because it's going to snow tomorrow. That's the thing. It is going to snow tomorrow. Oh yes, Spotify has their like U.S. headquarters in Fort Worth Trade, so it's still a pretty busy sort of like business sort of complex basically.
And
yes.
Condé Nast is in one, right?
Yes, they moved from Times Square down here at some point in the last couple of years.
I think Condé Nast is one of the first anchor tenants.
They were one of the first anchors down here. And a lot of the businesses, though, unfortunately, did not want to come back. So a lot of them have actually moved uptown, like Cantor Fitzgerald. They moved up, and they're not coming back to the Trade Center. So
Lisa says, "Yay, snow."
It'll be tomorrow, Lisa. You could tune in.
Yeah. Tune in on Tuesday.
Tune in on Tuesday.
We're doing another tour in English with Katie.
Okay.
And it'll be a white Christmas.
We have a potential for a white Christmas this year. If it's snowing this week, it might snow next week.
Oh my gosh, this thing is just a beast, huh?
So here we go. So this is requested, and this is if you're down at the Trade Center, you got to talk about the Oculus. So this is the World Trade Center train station. On the events of 9/11, the Trade Center train station was in fact destroyed. They had to build a new one, and in keeping with the sort of design, they wanted something something to stand out, and they came up with this design here. This is designed by a guy named Santiago Calatrava. He's from Spain. He's got, you know, designs all over the world. In this case, they call it the Occulus, and I'll tell you why. You see these spires that go out on either side? You look down the middle over here, there's a glass eye that runs the length of the structure. We'll be on the other side of it in a few minutes when we walk over to St. Paul's. But long short, these spires go out, and there's this eye down the middle. And if you're in the train station, down at the bottom, you look up, you can actually see the top of One World Trade back that way. And that's why it's called the Oculus. It's like a single eye. It's like an open eye. Some people said it's like dinosaur bones. It kind of is. It has that kind of like structure, but it's actually the Oculus because it's like one eye. It's the most controversial building on the grounds. Why? The cost.
Is it worth every penny?
It's over $4 billion. Yeah, they originally budgeted at $2 billion. Hey, by the way, you know, I mention this on the tour all the time. In the smallest defense, it's expensive to build train stations in New York City. And the reason is, all these tall buildings, guess what? The reason we can build all the tall buildings here, we have very strong foundational rock. It's called Manhattan schist. You got to cut through it to dig tunnels. It takes a lot of time. In this case, though, a lot of the cost is actually because of the ostentatious design. These stainless steel spires weigh between 20 and 40 tons, basically, on either. And it's, you know, stainless steel is notoriously expensive to build with. So a lot of the cost went into the design element itself. So it kind of rubbed people the wrong way. Also, when you go in there, aside from it being a train station, it's also like sort of a high-end shopping mall. One could say it kind of, a lot of people like. It's like a mall next to the memorial. So a lot of people are not thrilled with it.
Quick hi to David and Michelle. New York misses you guys too.
Hey.
And Kristen asks about if we know anything about this graffiti over here.
So this is a temporary shed while they are building up Two World and they're doing all kinds of things. So basically it's just here to beautify the area, you know, while they're doing construction over here. So it's not technically permanent. But the idea is, rather than have just some sort of like ugly scaffolding, to create some sort of just like visual. And it actually has changed over a couple of times. Yeah, go. Todd Gray's studio, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the.
You can definitely check out, that's how the artists do it. You get on
You gotta IG it, baby. It's all about the gram. Bow down to the ground.
So yeah, so that's the Calatrava design. Again, that's the most controversial building on the Trade Center grounds, for sure. They do a nice Christmas display inside there. And as we're walking up here, do you want to go to the front on Broadway, or do you just want to do it from the back end?
I think it's so cool either way. I think actually it's probably nicer from the back.
So
I guess we can't get into the kirkyard.
We cannot get into the churchyard, but we could do it either. We could just wind around it. I don't know.
It's like this graffiti is waving to us.
Hello,
little graffiti.
So we're coming up over here on a street called Church Street, and the reason it's called Church Street is the church right in front of us over here. This is St. Paul's Chapel. As we get over there, we'll get some really cleaner looks, but we're coming up on it. Might as well talk about it. St. Paul's Chapel is the oldest physical church in Manhattan. I mentioned before that Trinity was established back in 1696, which is before St. Paul's, which is 1762. I believe that's the correct date for that. You know, I haven't done this tour in a while. I have to brush up one or two dates. Sorry.
Well, we're going to delete any segments that weren't correct.
It's the only church from a physical standpoint that's from before the Revolutionary War. Right. Put it that way. And you see how close.
Trinity, because the Great Fire of New York.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. Established before, but it's actually an offshoot of Trinity. Actually, you see how close we are to One World Trade Center.
All right, I'm going to do the spin just to give a feeling for it.
Yeah.
So here's the churchyard, and we're doing the spin, we're doing the spin, we're doing the spin. And that's how close we are still to the Trade Center.
One World Trade, the original One World Trade is literally right on the other side of the Oculus over here.
Right.
This church, from before the revolution, survived the events of 9/11. If you heard about the church that was turned into the Rescue and Release Center for the first responders after 9/11, this is it. St. Paul's right over here. And right over, and as you notice also over here as we walk through up, you have these community graveyards. We were going to show you Trinities earlier, but because of COVID, they have sort of shut down a lot of the things that sort of, these areas that people congregate. When you're in Manhattan, it's an interesting thing about Manhattan. We don't have active cemeteries in Manhattan. We have not had a real burial in Manhattan, an official burial since 1920, 100 years ago. And the reason for it is what I was talking about before. Manhattan is the smallest borough by far, only 13 miles south, and we don't have the space for cemeteries. So the old churches and chapels have these community graveyards, and when they are open, and they are open sans COVID all the time, they would be open. You could walk through anytime you wanted to, basically, that the church is open. They're really interesting. There are interesting things to walk through to get a feel for old New York. You get a really interesting feel for old New York when you walk through the old community graveyards and the chapels and whatnot. A lot of the stones are from around the Revolution and things like that. So you see a lot of soldiers from the Revolution who may have be buried there and early New Yorkers, things like that.
As long as you had the money.
Exactly. Now the most prominent stone down here would have been of Alexander Hamilton at Trinity, but again we couldn't get on there today. But next time you're in New York, you can definitely check that. If you're a Hamilton fan, you can definitely do that.
Exactly. You say the price of my life.
And if you're a stan of the musical, you can definitely go down there, do your own little Hamilton sort of.
Exactly. I'd break out of the song, except YouTube would probably ban the video.
Do they do that? Do they really? Have they cracked down?
I think there's a copyright issue with even singing something in your own way.
Oh my goodness.
So where are we back on now? This is again.
This is Broadway.
Right? How can we tell?
The Mets won the World Series in 1969. Look at that. That's right. Canyon of Heroes.
Back to Canyon.
You know what? Do you want to wrap up at City Hall Park? We might as well.
Let's do it. Let's ask them.
Do you guys want to wrap up at City Hall? You want more?
Should we do a little bit more?
A little bit more?
If I don't see enough comments for a little bit more, we just got to finish now. I got to get some comments for a little bit more.
At least one comment.
At least 5 comments.
5 comments.
I need 5 comments for more, and then we can go just a little bit
While I'm sipping my water.
Yeah, you take a break, sip the water. I'll take a look at St. Paul. There's some latency, so they're getting the message a little bit later than we're saying it.
Any comments?
Yeah.
Any
comments. I'm gonna do this one. This live stream is powered by your comments.
Oh,
tips help a lot too.
More. All right, we got some more. Kristen.
Lisa says as long as her knitting's still going, as long as she still has yarn.
Well,
Lisa, are you knitting or are you crocheting right now? We got 3 comments for more.
That's enough.
Is that enough?
That's enough. That's enough for me.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it. There's no reason not to. Pope John Paul came and Pope John Paul II. That was a big one. He went to Yankee Stadium.
Poland for our friends from Poland.
Yeah. So we've been focusing a little bit on these like markers in the ground. They're fun. We don't do many parades anymore. They're very expensive, so we only do them when like major sports teams win. The last 2 have been for the U.S. women's soccer team when they won the World Cup. Those have been the last 2. So it was like last year and then 4 years before that, basically. And that's it. Mostly sports.
Yeah, it seems like it's too expensive.
It's expensive, and it's like you got a lot of policing. Honestly, to be frank, in the post 9/11 world, it's something that they try to sort of like
I think it's
restrict
probably best
those
that you just stay being Walter.
What's that?
You said you want to be Frank.
I want to be Frank.
I think that you being Walter is good enough.
Walter's good enough, basically. So what we're going to be doing now is going over to City Hall Park. When we get over there, there's actually some cool stuff to talk about on the grounds over there.
Now, City Hall is not where the mayor lives.
No. So there's the mayor of New York, and we'll show you City Hall in a second. The mayor of New York lives in a place called Gracie Mansion, which is in a park called Carl Schurz Park on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It's like on 91st Street off the East River. And yes, this is the
I'm going to do a
little Woolworth
pan of the Woolworth entrance.
Yeah. So this is the Woolworth Building right here.
Pretty cool.
When it opened, 1950, it's the tallest building. It surpassed Flatiron and a couple of other things to be the tallest building in the world for a couple of years.
So decorative.
It's sort of it's still a Beaux-Arts style structure, but it's inching towards Art Deco.
I think that there are a couple of residential apartments.
They have over the years, a few of our, by the way, 30 Pine before, which was that, again, wedding cake pan building, they have converted that into apartments over the years. So a lot of our older sort of office buildings and whatnot have been converted into apartments over the years. Woolworth Building gets its name from the Woolworth Company. F.W. Woolworth was his name, the original proprietor. They were known as five and dime stores, basically. And they were very popular. They were like the dollar store of their day, but even more popular. The Woolworths were very popular, so much so that they could afford to build a New York headquarters looking like this. So they made a lot of nickels and dimes, one could say, for the five and dime stores.
That was the whole thing that Woolworth invented, was the idea that in the old days, if you wanted to go to a shop, you'd go into the shop and you'd ask the guy at the other side of the counter to show you the broom.
Show you the broom.
And he'd have to hand it to you from the other side of the counter. But Woolworth was the first guy that says, no, put it out.
Yeah, go look
let
for
people touch stuff. And if they touch it, they're more likely to buy it.
And then if you buy it, you break it, you buy it.
Break it, you buy it.
You break it, you buy it.
Break it,
you buy it. So City Hall Park. City Hall Park, where we are right now, during the early days, even during the colonial era actually, when it was still under British rule, this was like the Commons. So this is where the town crier would come and yell, fire, 5 blocks away, that kind of stuff. And they would talk about the news of the day. They would put up notices and whatnot. This was like the common. This was the northern end of the city during the colonial era, if you can believe it. Now, there was more to the north, but it was either estates or farms. This was where this commerce kind of ended at that time, right up here. And you notice we just walked it basically on this tour from Battery Park up here. So it was actually relatively small. There were only a couple of thousand people in the city, 5,000 or 6,000 people during the actual colonial era. So this is where that all happened. So what else happened here at the Commons? You know what? Before, I just realized it now. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to be at City Hall Park. Earlier we mentioned that George Washington, was the commander of the Continental Army during the Revolution. The very first time that the Declaration of Independence was read in New York City, it was read right here at the Commons by George Washington. So remember that riot that ensued where they're carving up the fence?
Yeah.
It actually starts from right here when he reads out that declaration. This is kind of where it all happened. Where this fountain is, this was the sort of clean water source during the colonial era right over here. It was sort of a natural spring over here.
Before
they covered it up. Yeah, before, absolutely. This was sort of where you got your water back in the day, basically, around the town crier and whatnot. So it served a lot of functions over the years.
Which makes sense, and the reason why, if your water is coming from here, I imagine it's not just your drinking water, it's also the firefighters.
Oh, absolutely.
And in the winter, when it gets cold enough, things freeze up.
Absolutely.
Much harder to put out fires with ice.
It's a little bit harder to do that. It's very hard to do that, actually, I hear.
Hence why New York would burn down.
Yes, it was the problem. Listen, they used to have those little water cisterns all over the place with leather buckets on the side. People would actually just have to put stuff out all the time.
That was a requirement for your building.
Basically,
you had to have fire buckets inside of your building.
You had to have fire buckets. You had to fight. You were fighting fires all the time during these wood things. It's crazy. If you think about it, it actually makes sense, but it's something we don't think about.
Part of the problem of having buildings made of wood and having open flames as your lanterns.
Flame, yeah, burning coal and whatnot in them.
So weird that.
So this is City Hall. This is where the mayor has his offices, and the city council meets, things like that, and they sort of do the business of the city right over here. It's the oldest continuously run city hall in all of the United States, opened in 1812. So it's what, 208 years old. The current mayor of the city,
was it DeWitt?
208.
Was DeWitt, 1812, was it DeWitt Clinton?
No,
he
was
gone?
not. He was not the mayor. No, he was not the mayor at that time. He was governor at that time.
Was he already governor? No. Yeah?
You know what? Let's double check that.
I'm curious. I don't remember.
Let's double check.
If someone wants to check when DeWitt Clinton when was DeWitt Clinton mayor still in New York?
And then when did he become governor?
If someone wants to check that and let us know in the feed,
we can double check.
We'd be grateful.
I don't think he was the first mayor though of this city hall. I could be wrong.
Right? Yeah. No, I don't think so either. But I did think that he was responsible for putting the batteries up, putting the defenses up around New York Harbor.
I think that was the governor's move, though.
Maybe that was the governor's move. Yeah. Someone's going to tell us. Lisa will tell us. Lisa's if she puts down the crochet needles for a second, we'll get Lisa to do it.
So this is where the mayor. So the current mayor of New York City is Bill de Blasio, very tall man. You may have heard about him. He ran for president last year. As did our mayor before that.
Super popular, right? Bill de Blasio?
Let me tell you something about the mayoralty of New York City. It's the most thankless job, I believe, in existence. You get blamed for everything you have no control over, and the stuff you actually did, no one thinks you actually did it. They give credit to other people. So de Blasio ran for president. He got bounced. And then, if you recall, Mike Bloomberg, who was a 3-time mayor, and there's a squirrel.
He is fat.
Listen, if I was a squirrel, this would be a good park to live in. You get a lot of people down here feeding you. That squirrel might jump that camera. They are pretty bold, and if they're used to getting fed, you might lose that gimbal.
I'm worried about my fingers.
And Mayor Giuliani ran for president in 2008. So the last 3 mayors have run very unsuccessful bids for the presidency, but they actually have run. So it's actually an office that actually leads to a lot of national exposure. This is kind of where they do their business. Let's walk over here.
Does that mean that Bill de Blasio is going to turn into a vampire and start leaking
You
from
know,
his face?
I could definitely see that happen. He's not already doing it.
If you're a New York mayor that runs for president.
But what Chris was saying is a very apt thing. Currently, Bill de Blasio does not have a very high approval rating at all. But there are very few mayors that actually go out on a high note. The only one actually was Giuliani, and that was only because of the events of 9/11.
You're right. People didn't like Koch at the end either, did they? That's a shame. I thought he was a good mayor. Dinkins was basically run out of office.
You know.
Although people look back at Dinkins now fondly.
Well, Mayor Dinkins just passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Well, I guess that helps.
He was our only African-American mayor.
Right.
He just died. Yeah, let's wrap up right over. We're going to wrap up over.
Which is weird in a city that has a significant African-American minority population.
Yes, it's pretty, no women, and that's it. Mayor Dinkins is like the one. Staten Island can be blamed for a lot of things. It's the only borough that went for Trump.
Oh.
Other than that, it's pretty though. It's a beautiful borough.
Oh, yeah.
Staten Island's gorgeous. Staten Island
A great
is
ferry ride.
gorgeous. So if you're over here by City Hall Park, you see how close we are to the Trade Center. It took us 5 minutes to walk over here.
Right.
It's like, what? You get on the other.
Hey guys.
You get on the other side of the park over here. The Brooklyn Bridge, right over yonder. So you got the Brooklyn Bridge coming up. So if you want to actually get to another borough from right down here, you can scooch right across the bridge. You can ride across your bike in 15 minutes.
And this building here is the government.
So this building is the municipal building right here. That gold statue on top, if you're catching that, known as Civic Pride. That is the name of the statue on top of there.
Apologies for the pixelation on the Zoom on.
Oh yeah.
I apologize.
Apologies for the pixelation. So you've heard the term, we got married in City Hall. You do not get married in City Hall in New York City. Not happening.
Ask Lisa really quick, when did he become the 6th governor? DeWitt. What year did he become governor, Lisa? She's checking for us.
Okay.
Ask Lisa, what year did he become governor?
Lisa,
DeWitt?
what year did DeWitt Clinton become governor?
All right, she'll come to us in a second.
She'll come to us. See, Lisa's our research assistant.
So Lisa gets 20%.
So you don't get married in City Hall, you get marriage records and licenses, tax records, Social Security information. It's basically a hall of records for the city right across the way. And it's actually known currently as the David Dinkins Municipal Building. It's actually named in honor of the man we were just speaking about, David Dinkins, again, the only African-American mayor in the history of the city. And I think a good place to wrap up, as we're over here, or at least we get a little angle. I think we get a little angle on the
came back. Clinton became governor in 1817.
Look at that. So maybe he was.
Well, I got that at the Brooklyn Bridge.
That's the Brooklyn Bridge, all right.
When are we doing your walk across the bridge to Brooklyn? Not today.
Definitely not today. That's a lot of walking at the end, basically. Yeah. Let's walk over here, Chris. Let's get a better angle. There's too much. Yeah, let's cross the street, actually. Chris. Yeah. Let's wrap in front of the. We took this tour on a ride.
Oh, it's fun.
We took a ride on this thing. We didn't know where we were ending.
Perfect. My battery just hit 20%.
Perfect. I want to get on the other side of this and not get hit by a bike and wrap up.
Hey, Marcos Velasquez. Thanks for joining us, Marcos.
Thanks for joining us, Marco. Thanks for everybody who joined us. I can't see the screen, unfortunately. I would shout you all out, but you know what? Let's get on this side of the barricade, like right here, so we don't get hit by bikes. But that's the Brooklyn Bridge out there, you want to wheel around, you can, Chris. I don't know. Actually, you know what? Let's wheel around the hot dog stand. I'm trying to.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a hot dog advertisement.
No. So Brooklyn Bridge right here, opened in 1883. It's a fun little fact about the boroughs. They actually don't merge until 1898. When you said New York City up to that point, you were talking about Manhattan. But there was a lot of commerce coming through the harbor and it was going to other parts. And they said, hey, we got to merge things up. So one of the things that was sort of like, I guess, it was a big motivator behind actually merging the boroughs in a proper manner was this bridge, which literally linked Manhattan and Brooklyn together. Again, opened in 1883. One of the great engineering feats of all time. I get into it further, but
But for your next tour.
But for my next tour, that's right.
We gave these folks so much.
Any questions before we wrap up? Anybody have any questions for us?
Last chance for questions. I'm gonna pop. Check this out. This is a skin that pops up.
Yeah.
And says. That's the thing.
What did it say that?
Free tour New York with Walter. I made that special for you.
Oh, thank you.
It's just a little plug.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So thanks for joining us today on, again, this unseasonably warm day down here in New York City. And I'll see you next time, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, anyone can go high fives? Let's see. I'm just going to spin it. Then we can say goodbye to everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for the research, guys.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Lisa was awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And Marcos, thank you. Kristen, thank you.
Thank you.
Christina, also thank you very much for sticking with us. Michelle, David,
David,
Morton.
Morton
Jensen. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. We're cutting it.
We'll cut it.
You can press it. Press end.